Hey everybody, my name is Jim Farmer. I'm the festival director of Out on Film. I'm also an arts reporter for Georgia Voice, and I'm very excited to be able to talk to one of the co-directors of the documentary Cured today. Cured actually showed last year as part of our film festival and was tremendously well received. The documentary is actually going to be on PBS starting on October 11th, and it'll be streaming for 30 days. So that's always great news. When one of our filmmakers is able to get national exposure like that. So Patrick, thanks so much for talking to us today.
It's great to be with you, Jim. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Well, let me read a brief description of the film, then we'll jump in. Cured takes viewers inside the campaign that led to a pivotal yet largely unknown moment in the struggle for LGBTQ equality, the American Psychiatric Association's 1973 decision to remove homosexuality from its list of mental illnesses. Combining eyewitness testimony with newly unearthed archival footage, the film reveals how a small group of passionate activists achieved this unexpected victory. Congratulations again on this documentary. So what made you and Bennett want to work on this?
Yeah, it's been a long journey. I actually had this film on my radar in about the fall of 2014. A friend of mine in Washington, D.C., where I live, Charles Francis, is the head of an LGBT history organization, the Mattachine Society of Washington, D.C. That's actually the group that Frank Kameny started in the 1950s, and Frank is one of the heroes in Cured. And Charles wrote a screenplay about the life of Frank Kameny, and the screenplay included a scene that's actually the photo behind me, the 1972 panel discussion. If I move, you can see Frank Kameny was on the panel back there. And this was the seminal moment where the man in the mask, Dr. John Fryer, had to put on a mask and dress in disguise in order to talk to his colleagues about what it was like to be a gay psychiatrist. And It was a pivotal moment in this fight. So reading my friend's screenplay, this scene sort of jumped off the pages at me as something that would make an incredible documentary. And I embarked on it at that point and quickly decided it would be great to have a collaborator. So I recruited my friend and now colleague Bennett Singer to join me. And very early on, it was clear to us how significant this moment was in LGBT history. Because as long as we were classified as mentally ill, then business and government were going to use that as an excuse to discriminate. So it really had to be the first domino to fall after Stonewall in the fight for equality in order to make any progress at all. So our first order of business was figuring out who was still around from this fight. And we weren't really sure how many we would be able to track down, but it's been so humbling I think we ended up interviewing 12 different people who were involved either outside as activists putting pressure on the APA or people working from inside the organization to challenge the mental illness label.
So you started working on this in 2014, at least get the idea for it, and the film premiered last year. Did you think you would spend 6 years on this project?
Yeah, so we it's a independent film is a long road, so we weren't sure how long it would take, and it's just a matter of putting one foot in front of the other. But the whole production took 5 years. It started our first interview in the spring of 2015. And there are really two reasons why it took 5 years. Number one, there's so much archival material in the film. We had a great archival team, Murdu Chandra and Luann Jones, who were the archival producers on the film, and they really spearheaded the effort to find the visual elements that would be part of the story. And then Bennett and I also visited about a dozen archival facilities. Not everything can be found online. You actually have to get out of your apartment and go visit archives and dig through boxes. And we really uncovered some amazing material, but pulling together all of that and then editing it into a coherent and compelling story took a long time. And then, of course, there's the financial piece of it. We're raising the money to make a film like this. Bennett likes to joke that it was sort of hard to pitch this to people because we were basically saying, we'd like to make a film about meetings and conferences. But of course, there's so much more to it. But in order to stitch together, it took a lot of convincing, and we were really humbled by the support we received from various donors and foundations and corporations. But at the top of the list, the independent television service, ITVS, which is funded by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, provided a sizable chunk of the money. And that's what's led to the upcoming PBS broadcast on Independent Lens. So it's been a long journey, but so satisfying to be able to highlight this story because it is this seminal moment in our history that most people don't know about.
Exactly. it seems like this story has never really been told. I mean, I guess my question is, why has this story never really been told?
Yeah, we were lucky. Ben and I feel fortunate that no one told the story previously because, there was an NPR podcast, This American Life, back in 2003 called 81 Words. And it told this story. It's such a large story there. There's obviously more than one telling can be done. And that was a podcast. And there have been some documentaries that have touched on this, as a scene, a few minutes to sort of highlight this moment. But yeah,
Mhm.
but there's been no deep dive. And the thing about it is during the production, 5 of the people we interviewed passed away, unfortunately.
Wow.
The urgency was very much there. And
Mhm.
it's really the only time that a film like this about this event can be told in this way, with the firsthand recollections of the people who were there and brought about this change. So that was one of the things as the film unfolds. The people who were there are the storytellers we feature. They're the ones who guide us through the events that unfolded.
You mentioned, I think you said earlier you had 12 subjects in the film. Was it hard locating all them and getting them to tell their stories?
Yeah, the good thing, it was a bit challenging to track down some of them, but once we did, the people to a person were really thrilled to be able to participate. I mean, one of the Kayla Husen, she's passed away unfortunately in this past spring at age 91, but she was the partner of Barbara Giddings, and they together were these real, pioneers in our movement for equality. And Kay really hadn't done any interviews with other filmmakers when Barbara was alive. She died in 2007. She usually did a lot of interviews, so it was really particularly meaningful to have Kay's recollections. And I know we have dozens of hours of interviews with these folks. And one of the things Ben and I will eventually do is make these interviews available to an archive. So long after we're gone, historians can come along in 100 years and be able to have these firsthand accounts.
That's great.
Another interview that we were really thrilled to have. We were thrilled to get all the interviews, but another one in particular, Richard Socarides. His father, Charles, was the main villain in the story, the leading proponent of the mental illness label. And Richard was the main advisor on LGBT issues for President Clinton. And his father died in 2005, and until the day he died, never changed his view of homosexuality and was a leading proponent of conversion therapy. And so Richard had a really amazing story to tell. I can only imagine as a teenager trying to make sense of who you are, and then your father as this public presence, this public face, saying that homosexuality is a mental illness and gay and lesbian people should be cured. So we really appreciated his willingness to share his story, which I think can be very inspiring to young people who often have to overcome challenges in terms of coming out to their families and living authentically. So his perspective adds a lot, and it also makes Charles Socarides a three-dimensional person.
Sure.
He's the villain in the story, but it's also a complicated story, and he did a lot of damage to a lot of people. But
Exactly.
the interesting thing is he thought he was helping people. And so that sort of those layers of the onion, I think, bring a lot of texture to the story.
There's a certain level of irony in the fact that his son was gay.
Of course, if we were writing a script, a narrative Hollywood version of this, and we're sort of inventing this story, you absolutely would put that in the story, something like that.
I consider myself, I mean, I know a decent amount of LGBTQ history, but there was just some information in the psych community that I didn't know about. Was there stuff that you found about that maybe surprised you that you just had never heard about
Yeah, I mean, there was so much of the story we didn't know about. I mean, there have been some books written about, there's a couple books, but I feel like we really stitched together a full telling in terms of the interaction between the outside activists and the people working from within the APA. So that was a bit of a revelation to understand how important both of those pieces were. If you just had the outside activism, if you just had the outside activism where people are protesting at APA meetings and trying to put outside pressure on, you wouldn't have brought about this change in the way that it happened. And similarly, if you just had reform-minded people working from within the APA, they wouldn't have been able to achieve this without the outside pressure. So it was a bit of a revelation, this interplay between insiders and outsiders. And that, as you know, is a theme often of our movement for equality. whether it's the fight for the freedom to marry or ending Don't Ask, Don't Tell, you often need people who are, are navigating the halls of power, but then you need the folks in the streets who are protesting and chanting and demanding action.
Exactly. It's hard coming out for anybody in any era, but I mean, when I think about people who are growing up in the 50s and 60s, having to deal with all this, I mean, it was a time where literally people were afraid to come out. You were afraid for your life. Can you talk about, those limitations and what LGBTQ people were, how they were feeling back then?
Yeah, it's really, we can't overstate how difficult it was, and for people to live authentically. And it's understandable why so many people were in the closet or tried to, quote, change, because from the day they're trying to make sense of who they are as a teenager in the 50s, let's say, they're told they're sick and they need to be cured. And it has this stigmatizing effect, causing internalized homophobia. And one of our storytellers talks about going to the library at the University of Minnesota when he was a freshman and trying to make sense of what he was feeling.
Mm-hmm.
There were other people like him, and he goes to the bookshelves and there are 10 different books and all of them say he's sick and there's something wrong with him. So that was a huge stigmatizing impact. And then there were also some horrible treatments that some LGBT people faced, where, things like electroshock therapy and lobotomies and aversion therapy, these barbaric, quote, treatments were used in the 50s and 60s and before that as well, and some lingering into the 70s. And it really is horrific to think about what these people faced. Sometimes their parents forced them to do it. So we wanted to highlight that in the film. We didn't want to do it in a salacious way, and we didn't want to have people reaching for the remote control because they don't like what they're seeing. But we needed to be honest about what life was like for people back in this era when they were classified as mentally ill. So we highlight that early in the film, and then we shift and talk about the reformers who stepped forward and started pressing for change.
I was going to ask you about, I mean, I watched the film again today, the aversion therapy, the castration, the lobotomy. That's just hard to imagine that went on back then. But do you think that the younger generation, today's younger generation, have any idea that all this went on?
Some do. I mean, the fact is, as Americans, a lot of us, as a society, history is often ignored, whatever the subject, right? So much history people are not informed about. So I don't know if our community is any worse in that regard than the broader society. But we hope that this film can certainly open eyes and also inspire younger activists today who are on the front lines, continuing to push for the change that needs to happen. And certainly we've done. Aside from the 50 virtual film festivals, we've done about 100 virtual screenings as part of our outreach campaign with LGBT organizations and colleges and universities and community groups. And it's been really heartening to see the reaction that the film has with younger people. And it's been exciting to see that. And sometimes we have panel discussions where some of the storytellers from the film are there. So to see the interaction, the intergenerational reaction and the conversations that the film has sparked has really been exciting to watch. And that's one of the things we hope to do going forward, is use the film and to educate younger people in particular about this dark period. But also there's so much that's inspiring about it that can inform the fight that's still going on.
So the documentary debuts on PBS on National Coming Out Day, October 10th.
October 11th.
October 11th. I had 11. Okay, October 11th. And it streams for 30 days. Congratulations. How did that work out?
Yeah, thank you. It's been really wonderful, that partnership. And it's, to have the film on our country's national sort of broadcaster is fantastic. PBS, it's free to everyone. Netflix is great, Apple is great, HBO Max, fine. But you have a subscription, you need to pay $8 or $10 a month. Not everyone has every subscription. So to be able to say to everyone, it's free either on your TV or streaming for 30 days. And that, PBS and public broadcasting in general has been such an important partner in the film.
Sure.
The funding we received has allowed that to happen. And Independent Lens is an incredible documentary series on PBS, and we're the season premiere. And
Okay.
as you mentioned, National Coming Out Day is so appropriate for the story because
Sure.
that's one of the themes in the film. Various, storytellers talk about this process and of coming out and what sometimes that led to. So it's also October 11th is the 10th anniversary of the death of Frank Kameny. And so that's such a marker as well and an appropriate day to honor his legacy and the legacies of the other people we feature in this film.
Okay, good. So did I read that this is potentially being developed into a series by Stephen Canals?
Yeah, so 20th Century Television has optioned the film to be used as the basis for a 6-part limited series on FX or Hulu. And yes, Stephen Canals is connected to the project, the co-creator of Pose, and it's been great to be connected with him. Candidly, Hollywood is difficult, and so just because it's optioned doesn't mean it will be made. It's still early in the development phase. But even if this one doesn't happen, we're really excited about the potential to have a fictionalized version of this eventually on television, where of course the factual telling would be at the heart of it, but to be able to have I could imagine a scene where Dr. Fryer is in the green room putting on his mask, and you could think about the drama and the tension that he would have felt. So it's really exciting to think about that, and that also would allow the story to reach a much broader audience as well.
Exactly. So what are you working on next?
Well, I joke that it's sort of like asking someone when you come to see their new baby in the delivery room, sort of, when are you having another child? It's so, as you know, Jim, it's so hard to make a film like this, and it's just a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. So I have a file folder full of film ideas, but our main focus after the broadcast is going to be, continuing with our outreach and engagement campaign. We've been really fortunate to raise some money for that, and hopefully raise additional dollars to eventually make the film available free to every high school teacher in America who wants to
Wonderful.
use the film in the classroom. So we'll be focused. Certainly, I think it'll be my main focus for the next 4 to 6 months. And I also need to take some time off. I'm just worn out. So I have a lot of good. I think there are a lot of good ideas. So hopefully, in the year ahead, I'll be moving ahead on one of those, and I hope it won't take another 5 years for the next one.
The documentary is Cured. It will be on PBS October 11th. I got my October 11th, and streaming for 30 days. It's an extraordinary film documentary. Thank you, Patrick, so much for making the film documentary, and thanks so much for joining us today.
It's been a delight. Thank you for the kind words and the opportunity to speak to you about the film.
Sure thing. We'll catch up with you soon.
Okay.
Thanks so much.